clear away some of the outdated laws and regulations that made it harder to build homes.
Wait, rewind. Did Obama let loose his inner housing policy nerd at the Democratic National Convention?
If we want to make it easier for more young people to buy a home, we need to build more units and clear away some of the outdated laws and regulations that made it harder to build homes for working people in this country. That is a priority.
And housing is the centerpiece of Kamala's economic agenda?
We are going to cut red tape and work with the private sector to build 3 million new homes by the end of my first term.
Because here's what we know. People with stable housing end up with stable jobs. People with stable housing have their kids able to get to school.
Governor Walz loves housing, and the governor of my home state of Maine too.
You and I both know that the biggest impediment to our economic growth is the lack of affordable housing for our growing workforce.
The single highest priority for the Mills administration in dealing with this crisis is adding supply, because we know that the most painful consequence of an undersupply of housing is homelessness.
That was Greg Payne, senior housing advisor to Governor Mills, who says Maine needs 80,000 new units by 2030. It's a tall order for a small population state, but if everyone across the country is saying housing is too expensive and there's not enough of it, could we actually succeed in saying yes to housing in our local communities? At GPCOG's Housing Summit this year, you had the rare occurrence of the Portland Regional Chamber of Commerce at the same table as the Natural Resources Council of Maine, and they were both agreeing that housing is a top issue.
Housing issues are climate issues. We can't separate those two things.
Businesses and environmentalists agree. In Maine and across the country, it is imperative we do something about housing. But it's regular people moving from caring about housing and complaining about housing to actually doing something about it that is really moving the needle. That's why today we are talking to Todd Morse of the Urbanist Coalition of Portland, Maine, and hearing from Sonia Traus, a founder of the YIMBY movement in California, who spoke on the Merida Matters podcast about how anyone can show up at a local town meeting and make a difference. I'm Orion Breen. I say yes to housing, and you can too.
The first thing is don't make the perfect the enemy of the good, and introduce yourself to your elected. I mean, a lot of people are like, oh, well, if I don't know everything about the issue, then probably I shouldn't email. They think they're going to have this great 3-paragraph email for their city council. No, you do not.
Right.
You do not. And go to public comment, because you will see, you'll go and you'll be nervous. Am I going to sound smart? Okay. You'll see the other people there. They do not sound smart. It's very inspiring to hear, what are the messages your electeds are getting now? Because you'll be like, oh, okay, I will not be the dumbest thing they've heard today. We want to believe that our decision makers are looking at facts and figures, but they are not. You want to print out some Brookings Institution thing or whatever. You have your little white paper. They see it's there. Mm-hmm. They probably don't read it. What's really effective is being like, hi, my name is whatever. I live in XYZ neighborhood. I have a dog, or I have a kid, or I love to whatever. Mm-hmm. I play pinochle. I don't know. Yeah. You talk about yourself, and then you say, we need more housing. Housing is good. I like diversity. I like integration. I like density. I'm totally not worried about parking. And I vote. And I phone bank, and I door knock. And then actually you should vote and door knock.
Then you should follow through on some of those things, not just say them. Yeah.
Yeah. But even just saying them, the person will be like, oh, this person knows that elections, what you do in an election. So that's really what it is. And it's very powerful. And if somebody's running and you think they're good, then show up a couple times, because
they'll listen to you.
Oh my God. And they'll recognize you. Not a lot of people door knock. And this is what was something that was so encouraging and a revelation when I started, was that I realized, especially for particular housing projects, a lot of times if we didn't show up, or if I didn't show up, there would have been literally no one in favor. And I would go to meetings where it would be me speaking in favor, maybe 1 or 2 other people, very small numbers of people. And then there would be 6 people against. And just the fact that there were a couple people from the public saying this is a good idea allowed the planning commissioners to say, well, we've heard from both sides. We can see that there are community members for and against, and we decided that, yes, the housing's good, right? In a situation where if there had been literally no one, then they would have continued the project, hoping that someone, because it just gives, like, the planning commissioners, a lot of them actually do want to follow the law, like the planning staff, they write this zoning, they want this thing, they go to school because they want to bring communities, into existence. And it's very frustrating for them when you just have 6 naysayers and then they don't feel like they have the license, the support to say yes. So it really, nothing draws a crowd like a crowd, right? Some people are only motivated when they feel like there's a lot of other people there, which is fine. That's normal. Luckily, I'm mostly motivated when I feel like no one else is going to do it. And that's why I was the person that was like, no one's doing this, so I will. And frankly, now that all this stuff exists, I'm like, you guys are fine.
Todd Morse. I am the president and founder of the Urbanist Coalition of Portland. And we do a lot of housing advocacy as well as transit advocacy and pedestrian and issues like that, just generally creating denser, walkable neighborhoods with enough housing. When we build in a way that makes room for people and also allows people to get around in ways other than a car, it just has all of these positive benefits. Aside from being pleasant to live in, there's a lot of environmental benefits, there's a lot of equity benefits, there's a lot of economic mobility and development benefits. And I think it's just a great thing to encourage. LD 2003, which is kind of the big thing that we did, and that was kind of our first and biggest city council participation. We had, I think, 18 people come to speak in favor, which is a lot for these meetings. There's really not a lot of people at them, and it was raining. And we had a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds come and testify. I think ultimately the council was able to make some progress on housing, and that was really inspiring. Public speaking is not something that comes naturally to me. And I think that it helps to have a group of people who are also doing it. We go together to meetings, we sit together, we give each other encouragement. I think that's really important, and also pre-preparing what you're going to say, because I think once you get up there, sometimes the words just kind of slip out, and then just doing it. Showing up the first time, you're going to seem really nervous. You're going to trip over your words. I totally did. But just kind of keeping at it, and you do get better at it over time. Most of my friends at this point are, through the Urbanist Coalition. I think it's a really good way of meeting people I never would have otherwise met. And it's also a social thing. We have monthly beer socials. We have, our meetings. We do events together. When you're kind of doing this advocacy work together, it's also kind of a bonding experience. And it's just been great to meet all of these really passionate people. Just in general, I think it's kind of a big tent with the pro-housing. You have people who, care about the economic development piece. You have the environment piece. And I think, all of these voices are welcome.
I love how different Todd and Sonia's personalities are, but they both have found their voice as housing advocates in their communities. I asked Todd how he talks to people who are worried about change and oppose projects.
It's important, we approach everyone with compassion. I think change is scary and change is sometimes bad. I mean, I do tend to support projects, but I don't think that every single thing we could possibly change is always going to be good. So I think meeting them where they are, hearing their specific criticisms are important. But I think the other thing to focus on is what happens if we don't change. I think people often focus a lot on kind of the physical form of neighborhoods and places. And that's important. I'm not saying we should not do any sort of historic preservation, but there's also kind of the way of life and the people. And if we don't grow the people in the neighborhood, will kind of change out from under us, because we can preserve the buildings, but that doesn't mean, the children of people who grew up there will have somewhere to live. Keeping in mind that we can't really avoid change, we can just choose how it happens, is also really important. We have, competitive elections where people really care and people go to city council meetings and people show up to vote, and people are really passionate about where they live. And that is really inspiring for me. Just think that the most important thing is that it's possible to get involved. It's possible to get involved locally, and it's possible to make a difference. I think, nationally things can be very stressful and tense, especially these days, and that's all very important. But I think we can go a lot further sometimes with our direct neighbors, where you can still have kind of conversations and come to a consensus and make real meaningful progress right where you live. And I think seeing that happen is really inspiring. And I think both locally and nationally for me. And you can meet a lot of great people while doing it. And it's been very fulfilling for me, and I would recommend trying it out.
Thank you to Todd and Sonia and everyone who is speaking up and taking action for housing diversity and abundance. Find out more about Sonia's work at yimbyaction.org and Todd's work at urbanistportland.me. Thank you to the Merida Matters podcast and to GPCOG for access to their Housing Summit audio. Thank you for listening and sharing and being a part of the Yes to Housing movement.
Yes to housing.
Nibzo inzu irakenewe.
Yes to housing.
Yego kumazu.
Yes to housing.
Guryaha waa loo baahan yahay.
Yes to housing.